welcome to the Papacy, A Living History. I'm your host, Father Richard Kunst, and this is my co-host, Father Ryan Moravitz.
Father Rich, good to see you.
Father Ryan, good to have you here. Thanks for being here. Today what we're going to be talking about is the events surrounding the pontificate of St. John the 23rd and some of the items associated with his pontificate. It's exciting, as we've talked about in regards to St. John Paul II, that we can now refer to John the 23rd as Saint John the 23rd. It's an excellent thing, and it's exciting, especially those of us that are really students of papal history or church history, and who love the Holy Fathers. This is truly an exciting time to be able to be here and to be at the event, because we both went to the canonization and now refer to these guys as saints.
Yeah, and to see these two canonized together was such an exciting and historic moment in the history of the church. And two popes from our modern times,
right,
that had such a great impact and influence on the hearts of so many people, and the church itself. And St. John the 23rd, who is a courageous man,
right,
who is a joy-filled man, who had a great pastoral heart. To see him canonized, and many people today still remember him,
absolutely,
still speak about him, and remember watching him and hearing him.
Right.
What an exciting time,
right,
in church history to be a part of,
yeah,
and to participate in such a great way.
He was just known as Good Pope John. That was kind of like his nickname. Everybody referred to him as Good Pope John because of his whole demeanor. His whole disposition was one of being very bright, very happy, very jovial, and he joked a lot. He had a lot of one-liners. The one time I remember, the line I remember the best is that somebody once asked him how many people work in the Vatican. He said, about half of them. And so that's a good line. You don't normally hear that from a pope.
He had a great sense of humor, and he was well known for that sense of humor.
I know another one of his lines that became fairly well known is that he said, when he goes to bed at night, he decides that he's overcome by all the burdens of the church that is upon him, and at night before he went to bed, every night he would say, Jesus, this is your church, take care of it until I wake up.
Yeah.
And that was always part of his final prayer at night.
That's a great sign of humility too. Another one
right,
of the great virtues that we see in this great saint.
Yeah.
Is a virtue of humility.
Right. And he was only pope for just under 5 years,
right,
and he was elected pope to be a transitional pope,
right,
because Pius XII before him had been pope for I think it was like 19 years, 7 months, right around there. And from that standard at that point, that was a very long pontificate. And as is custom throughout papal history, is that an older man is elected to be, quote unquote, the transitional pope. And so John the 23rd was elected pope at 76. Now back in 1958, 76 was an elderly man. And so he was thought to be a transitional pope, just to give the cardinals a little breathing room until they can figure out who they want for more of the long term. Of course, we know that John the 23rd is anything but a transitional pope.
He really became one of the most consequential individuals and popes in modern Catholic history and world history as well.
That's right. Yeah, I remember reading in 1999 or right around 2000, they were going through one of the Catholic periodicals, or some sort of a publication was going through the top 5 events of the church of the 20th century, and number 1 was something that St. John the 23rd called, and that was the Second Vatican Council, the most important event of the 20th century, called by this humble transitional pope, St. John the 23rd. And what we have here are a couple of ballots from, actually I've got 3 of them in the collection, but these are actual Second Vatican Council ballots that the bishops would have used to vote on a document, to vote on maybe a part of a document, but we can see that there's little punched holes in them. It's like a punch hole ballot, and that would determine what that particular bishop was thinking. So it wasn't just yes or no, it was also a little bit of a maybe. And so they're interesting. They're rare. I don't see them out on the market at all, really. In fact, the only ones I've ever seen are the ones that I've got. And in each case, whoever it was that took these out, some bishop, put postage stamps on them, and then had the Vatican's post office stamp them for the final day of the council, which makes it interesting as well.
You look at what those votes did and the influence they had on the church and the pastoral practices of the church, the liturgy, the training of priests, diplomacy in the world. It's quite incredible. The courage it took for John the 23rd to call an ecumenical council.
Right.
was quite significant, and he started to think about it very early on in his papacy.
Well, he called it very early on.
Correct.
Yeah.
And his secretary recalls that in the first few months, his desk was full of problems and questions and situations throughout the church around the world. And it wasn't doctrinal problems, it was pastoral problems.
Right.
And that he sat there one day and said, you know, what we need to do is call a council.
Yeah. And,
Which was a courageous thing to even think of.
Absolutely.
And especially with his age, knowing that
he probably wouldn't see it through.
he wouldn't see it through,
Right.
but he knew, and he told him, he said, the important thing is that I opened and I started, and that
Right.
in itself is a great work.
One of the things that's not very well known is that actually the Pope prior to him, Pius XII, was getting a lot of pressure to call a council himself. And he didn't. He didn't think it was the proper time, and it wasn't the proper time. But he was getting that pressure. And so John the 23rd certainly read the signs of the times, and that's what he wanted to do, is to really bring a breath of fresh air, new breeze, and new wind coming through the church, and that's why he called the Second Vatican Council.
And that courage and that faith is one of the reasons we call him Saint
Saint
today.
John the 23rd, exactly. The common thing when a man is elected a cardinal, is not really elected a cardinal, the Holy Father actually selects these men as cardinals, is that the men that have been selected to be cardinal, they go to Rome and then they receive the red hat from the Pope in what's referred to as a consistory. Something very unique for St. John the 23rd is that he actually, when he was elevated to be a cardinal, he didn't get the red hat from the Pope.
Really?
Yeah, it was Pope Pius XII that named him, but he was actually the nuncio in France at that time. And the president of France actually invoked an ancient tradition that's not nearly as common anymore.
Wow.
And so it was very common in the ancient times, but very rare today. He invoked a privilege as a Catholic head of state to be able to actually put the red hat on the newly minted cardinal. And so that's what happened with John the 23rd. He was actually made a cardinal. There's at least one other really big name that was named cardinal at his time. That was Cardinal Wyszynski, who was the primate of Poland, who factors big in St. John Paul II's life. But right here is a card that now newly minted Cardinal Roncalli had printed to thank the people that went to the ceremony that was elevating him and that sent him cards and congratulatory notes. This is a thank you card that he had printed up himself.
Wow. Obedience and peace was his motto.
That was his motto that he kept all the way through all the way up into his pontificate.
And he really lived that out. Obedience and peace throughout his entire life.
That's right.
You know, before he became a cardinal, he was a boy in Bergamo.
That's right. Yep, a small northern Italian town.
Italian town. He entered seminary at the age of 12.
Yeah, that's
So
rare.
early on, he felt a sense of a call to the vocation of the priesthood.
But you were ordained at 12, weren't you, Father Ryan?
Exactly.
It kind of looks like
yeah,
it.
That's it. Yeah, you know. Now that I'm 19,
Yeah.
that's not true. But he entered seminary, and then he left seminary for a little bit,
That's right.
and he served in the armed forces.
He didn't do that by design. He didn't want to do that. He was conscripted into it.
Right.
Right.
But then he came back to seminary,
That's
was
right.
ordained a priest, ended up serving some time as a chaplain
That's right,
for
in
the
the
armed
military again.
services.
Yep. And sometimes you can see old photos of him in the uniform, like the military uniform, which is
Right.
interesting.
You know, so prior to becoming cardinal, all these different things happen in one's life. He served as a secretary to his bishop as a young
That's right.
priest.
Yep, as a young
He
priest.
then got called to Rome to help out there in an office. And from there, he's kind of sent out. He went to Bulgaria.
That's right.
He was sent to Greece and Turkey. And there he worked towards finding POWs that were still missing.
Right.
And then he ended up in France.
That's right.
And he helped rebuild the church in France after World War II, which would have been quite a task.
That's right.
For his time.
You use the terminology soldier, and that's really what he was for the church. He wore many different hats, and he was trusted by the popes to wear these different hats, and he obviously did a very good job with that, to be elevated, to be recognized, and to be elevated. And what we hear, see on the top of this card is actually his coat of arms as a cardinal. We see the galero, which is the hat, and the tassels. The amount of tassels is the ranking, shows the ranking. But we see one of the prominent symbols on that coat of arms is the lion.
Right.
And the reason why the lion is there is because he was the Patriarch of Venice. Do you know the other three popes of the 20th century that were the Patriarchs of Venice when they were elected?
Pius X?
Pius X and?
Pius XII. No, Paul VI.
No, it was John Paul I.
Oh, so John Paul I.
That's all right. You're learning. So there's three. We would call all popes are significant, but three popes from the 20th century, and that's because of the Basilica of Saint Mark, which is up in Venice, and so Mark and the lion is the emblem. So we see that very clearly symbolized.
There's a great story from St. Peter's Basilica about the lion.
That's right.
And that I think it was for the opening of the council. They
Yes.
had a lion in the coat of arms
In the entryway.
in the entryway to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And the lion appeared to be smiling.
That's right.
Right?
Do you remember who the artist was?
I don't.
Okay. Giacomo Manzu.
No, you're getting me good today.
Giacomo Manzu was a communist who was not necessarily friendly to the church.
Okay.
But
Didn't he do something else at St. Peter's?
He did. He did the door of death.
door of
Not the
death.
death door, but
Not
the door of death. That's
okay.
right. And so Manzu also did the coat of arms. And how did the story go with that?
I think they complained because it appeared that the lion was smiling.
That's right.
And I think because he knew John the 23rd smiled a lot. He was such a joyful person.
And they were good friends.
So people didn't like it.
That's right.
And they wanted him to change it or remove it. And he said, not until the Pope sees it.
That's right. He wanted to have the Pope approve it because he didn't want to take the time and effort to say, well, I'm not going to lift this up till the Pope says it himself.
Right. And he came down and saw it. And then he said something. He was famous for one-liners, as we've said.
He said, I like happy lions.
Finished. I like happy lions. It stays as it is.
You got a good knowledge of history of John the 20th. You must have a good teacher.
Well, I'm learning day by day.
Okay, good. One of the favorite parts of the collection, which is quite vast, you're familiar with the collection, is clothing items. Papal clothing items are rare. They don't come out very often. They're not made to the public very often. And the line that I've used, I know in a past episode, and I'll use it probably many times over the years, is that popes don't have rummage sales, and that really does indicate, the difficulty of actually finding a clothing item of a pope. They just don't happen very often. Probably the clothing item that you hear mostly getting out to the public would be the zucchetto. The zucchetto is the little skull cap, the beanie, so to speak, and that's what we have right here. And the reason why that would come out more often is because of the very old tradition of going to Gammarelli's, which is the papal clothing maker.
Yep.
Has been the same papal clothing maker since the year 1799, 1800. It's a Jewish family, and they're the main tailors of the Pope. If you go to Gammarelli's in Rome and you buy a white zucchetto, only one size, only one man wears white, you might, if you're lucky, be able to swap with the Pope if you have an audience with him. That's the most common way that these zucchettos come out. And we know Pope Francis certainly recognizes that. I mean, his people are swapping cardinal zucchettos with him all the time. But this one didn't come that way. This one actually I got from a doctor out in California who had found, it was before I had my website, so I mean, there wasn't a whole lot about the collection out there, but there was enough on the World Wide Web to where she found me several times from different articles or whatever that was done. And so she contacted me and she said, I've got a couple of zucchettos from different popes, I got a bunch of relics, I mean, I don't know what to do with these things. And I said, I know what you can do with these things. And so she actually gave them to me. She donated them to me. And the story is, as I asked her, how did you come across these zucchettos? I got one of John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, and Paul VI. She had a cousin that was actually in the convent in the Vatican, in St. Peter's. And this nun was kind of in charge of the laundry, or at least one of the ones that were working in the laundry. And so she got that.
The Pope's laundry.
The Pope's laundry. And so I don't know if you wash the zucchettos, but she had certainly access to different clothing items of the Pope. And so this cousin of this doctor got it right out of the Vatican, and then she sent it to me.
Wow. You look at clothing items, and for me, it does bring home the reality of the human nature of the church. There's the invisible, the spiritual, the divine nature that we're all striving for as a church as a whole, the holiness of the church. But then there's this component of, we're very human too, and these are always items that kind of bring it home a little bit, the clothing items. But the zucchetto and the white zucchetto, like you said, only one person wears the white zucchetto, right? And it reminds me of a funny story of Saint John the 23rd. It's great saying Saint John the 23rd, isn't it? Of Saint John the 23rd, he said he would sometimes wake up at night, and he was a diplomat and a cardinal, so he would have often had to tell the Pope things.
Yeah.
And he would wake up from sleep and go, "Oh, I have to tell the Pope that."
Yeah.
And then he said, but then I'd fully wake up and realize, oh my goodness, I am the Pope.
Yeah. Now who do I tell?
He'd probably take a note.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure I remember in the morning.
But you mentioned about the very human aspect of these things. When you have a clothing item, it's a mundane thing. We all we don't even think twice about putting on our clothes in the morning. We all have to do that.
Right.
And the Pope is no different than that. And so to have this clothing item that the Pope wore, who knows how many times he wore it, but he wore it. It was just part of his wardrobe. And to have this saintly Pope, St. John the 23rd, have something right here that he actually wore. He wore this thing. And those things really, make him come alive for me. When I've got these items, these guys come to life for me in a very real, tangible way.
For me, I right now think of, we look at this and I see it, and I think of him. I also think of the different times that I've been in vast crowds where the Pope is working his way through.
Right.
And sometimes all you see
is the zucchetto.
You can't see anything else, but you can see the zucchetto going through the crowd.
Exactly.
So think of all the people that saw the zucchetto.
That's right.
Maybe going through St. Peter's Square and knowing, there he is.
Yeah.
All I can see is a zucchetto, but there is John the 23rd.
Right. It symbolizes the papacy for us.
It really, really does.
I know that you spent your first year as priest in Rome studying.
Yes.
Right? And so you probably had a number of opportunities to go to St. Peter's Basilica and say Mass.
I did. A number of different occasions with small groups or with groups of friends.
Yep.
Yes.
It's a great experience.
Wonderful experience.
Any priest can go there. You have to get there at a certain time. It's in the early morning.
Nobody else is in the basilica.
That's right. It's very small groups, with each different priest. There's 44 different altars. Only 43 are available because one is the main one. You can't say Mass up there. But
unless you're the Pope.
Unless you're the Pope. And so you have a choice, basically, of all these different altars. Some of them you have to reserve.
Right.
For example, the tomb of John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, is now an altar. You can't say Mass at that altar unless you reserve it. Right. And so I was able to, the year he was beatified, a number of years ago, I was able to say Mass at that altar, which was a great experience. And actually, he was buried at that altar. Do you know why he was buried at that altar?
I think he liked the mosaic above it, right?
That's right. It was actually, as a priest, as a bishop, that was his favorite altar because it had the final communion of St. Jerome, and he must have had a devotion to St. Jerome, and so so there's a divine justice in that he was able to be buried there. But what often when you go to St. Peter's, well, not often, usually they give you a chasuble. It's not like you're bringing your chasuble. You'll bring an alb, which
is like into the sacristy. They rest you. You're ready to go.
And a lot of those chasubles, not all of them, but a lot of the chasubles actually would have the Pope, the reigning Pope's coat of arms embroidered, or at least part of the chasuble. And that's what we have here. We have an older copy. It's a fiddleback, an older chasuble with the coat of arms of John the 23rd. All throughout the clothing, and there's a little bit of a leap here for me. I'm not 100% sure. I don't have documentation that this was used in St. Peter's or that it belonged to St. Peter's. But if I was a betting man, I'd say it was, because I don't think that there's too many other places that would have this type of a style with the coat of arms of the Pope in the chasuble. So it's an interesting piece that would be connected to any priest that would be saying Mass in St. Peter's Basilica.
I think of celebrating Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, and priests would have likely celebrated Mass with this chasuble. I always get excited with the pieces that surround the Eucharist.
Of course.
But you think of in Rome, when you're there, and there's a part in the Eucharistic prayer where we pray for our bishop.
That's right.
So for us here in Duluth, we pray for Pope Francis, our Pope, and Paul, our bishop.
That's right.
Well, in Rome,
you say our Pope and Bishop.
Our Pope and Bishop.
Right.
Francis today, but back
John
then,
the 23rd.
if you were
just say John.
John, correct.
Yeah. My favorite part of church history, papal history, I'm very much, as you know, a student of papal history, but my very favorite part about reading and studying about the history of the popes are the elections, the conclaves.
They're exciting
They are exciting. I mean, they're exciting times when you're living it. It's really exciting when you're reading about it because there's so much intrigue. I mean, it's truly, truth is stranger than fiction when it comes to papal elections. And they make for good reads. There are books out there that give the history of papal elections. So, despite not only being interesting, because it's such a very narrow period of time, anything associated with a papal election is, unique and rare. And what we have here is something that's very extraordinarily rare. As simple as they look, they're very, very rare. These are two different seals that sealed the conclave shut from 1963 after St. John the 23rd died. He died in 1963. This was the two of the seals. There's 4 seals that lock the 4 doors of the Sistine Chapel.
So when you see the Monsignor close the doors,
they'll eventually be sealed with these.
This.
That's right.
Wow.
And really, these are ceremonial.
Right.
I mean, somebody could break these things, but on one side it says conclave, on the other side it says the year, 1963 in this case, and this could easily be associated with what we refer to as, Pope Paul VI. These are the seals that held the conclave that elected him, but equally with John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, because obviously if it weren't for his death in 1963, we wouldn't have had a conclave, and so very, very unique, very rare items, and we can imagine that maybe somebody from the Swiss Guard or some sort of low-level, staffer went there and, as he was taking them, put them in his pocket. There's no other explanation how these things would get out.
Right. One of the significant things that St. John the 23rd did in the church is he raised the number of cardinals from 70 and above. Up to that point, it was only 70 cardinals in the college, particularly of electors. And within 4 years, I think it was all the way up to 87.
87. You know where that history comes from?
I'm not certain.
Yeah, the story of 70 actually comes from the 70 elders that helped Moses to to kind of direct the people, govern the people, and that number 70 was not made a cap until the 1580s. A pope by the name of Sixtus V actually established the 70, and it never went above 70 until recent years. Now, of course, now it's 120. But even that's often violated.
Right. I think of always the Pope coming out of the Sistine Chapel. He's been elected. Now he's got to come and stand in front of the world. But that guy who's standing in front of the world is a kid from Bergamo.
In this
instance,
that's right. And
St. John the 23rd.
The pictures are beautiful when you see these guys. They're common pictures where they open it up and the newly elected popes walking out. You can just imagine what's going through his guy's mind. I just seen the one of Pope Francis just the other day. It's like, what is going through his mind as he just got elected?
He's got to be scared to death.
Yes, exactly.
So important to pray for him, right?
Exactly.
Right.
The collection that I have started as an autograph collection. Of the papal side of things. It was all about getting popes' autographs. And, I used to collect celebrity autographs when I was a kid. And
do you want my autograph?
No, because for a whole bunch of reasons, but I'm not going to tell them right now. But one of the first autographs I ever got, in fact, I got 2 of them in one auction. There was an auction that I'd never seen a papal autograph made available before. I was very young. And at this auction, there was one of John the 23rd, St. John the 23rd, and Paul VI. And then there's another one of Pius XII, and I just couldn't believe it. And actually, I borrowed money from my younger sister, Samantha, who was very generous to me at this time, and I won 2 of the auction items, 2 of the autographs, and so this is one of them. This is my first papal autograph.
So this is how this collection got started.
Right here, exactly,
here.
Yep.
Wow.
And so this was, because it all started with autographs, and that's the heart of the collection is autographs. This is one of 2 of the first papal autographs I got, and John the 23rd. We can imagine it's on a calling card of a rectory in Seattle. So we can imagine that some priest or some seminarian was probably writing to all these cardinals with the calling card, asking them to sign, and so it's kind of unique in that regards.
I think of it and I look at it, and 2 things pop up: obedience and peace,
which is his motto.
But I can't help but to think of the pastoral component here. I see his name, and I look at the St. Anne's Rectory is what it says, and I think of the pastoral component of this saint. And we as priests being called to be pastors, and for St. John the 23rd, that was key.
Right.
That was key for his
who he
life,
is, yep.
to who he was, to his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading a quote recently of him speaking about, well, we can be very learned,
Mm-hmm.
we can have all the great diplomatic ability,
Or it can be just a simple priest.
or it can just be a simple priest.
Right.
The key is, are we pastoral?
Being pastoral.
Are we being pastoral? Are we leading others to Christ,
Mm-hmm.
to the joy, to the redemptive grace of Christ? And that, for me, is the reason that he's such an inspiring saint.
Right.
He's such an inspiring priest and pope, is because he had the heart of a pastor.
Exactly. One of the more popular souvenirs at the Vatican, you go to St. Peter's or, is stamps and coins. The Vatican produces its own coins and stamps. It's been doing that since 1929. Actually, long before that, up until 1870, the Papal States were there, but in 1870 it was suppressed into one peninsula in the Italian state. But then in 1929, the Vatican city-state was recognized by Mussolini, and it became its own nation. So since 1929, the Vatican has been able to produce its own stamps, its own coins again. And so what we have here is actually a coin set from St. John the 23rd's time of his pontificate from 1962.
Wow.
And they'll sell them as sets, as souvenirs, commemorative sets. You can also get them as individuals. You can get them in your change when you're there right now. And this this actually shows the commemoration of the Second Vatican Council.
So it's a commemoration of that historical event that St. John the 23rd will be known for
Forever.
Mm-hmm. But also remembering certainly his courage in opening the council.
That's right.
But that his joy, his faith, his hope
That's right.
really brought him and
And
led him to be declared a saint.
And it truly shows that the papacy is a living history.
It really does.
I'd like to thank you again for joining us for the Papacy of the Living History, and we hope to see you next time.